Hey, good morning, everybody. Today we're reading in Judges chapter 13, and it's the beginning of 3 consecutive days where we're going to be focusing on the Old Testament character of Samson. Now, chapter 13 starts out in a very familiar way, very familiar as we've been reading Judges. Verse 1 says, "Again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. Now, this is a similar pattern to what we've seen in other chapters of Judges in the other episodes that have taken place. First, Israel sins and they fall deeply into sin, and there's severe consequences. And oftentimes it's God handing them over to one of their neighbors. In this case, it's the oppression of the Philistines that's listed. And then God sends a deliverer. But as we go back and look in the other episodes, we realize that there's one step missing here in this typical pattern. In previous episodes, when Israel was so deep in the oppression that came from the neighbors, they were suffering so much, they would cry out to God. But in this case, there is no crying out to God. Maybe it was because they'd been in this pattern for so long that they felt so distant from God, and they had really forgotten him. Or maybe it was because they had become so used to the evil influences and all that was around them that they began tolerating it, and they got caught up in their sin and they didn't even know they were in the middle of it. That's sort of the background story for Samson. And now, we learned that Samson was born to a very obscure, unknown husband and wife. God does not wait for Israel to cry out, as we said before, but instead he chooses Manoah and his wife, who are from the tribe of Dan. And God's unknown parents have been unable to bear a child. But this child does not appear to be in response to a prayer, as it was for Hannah in 1 Samuel, or Elizabeth in the story of John the Baptist. God just does it. And so we want to read verses 3 and 5 and get a little bit more insight here. It says, "The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, 'You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines.'" Now, neither mom nor son are to eat or drink anything associated with grapes or alcohol or anything unclean. And according to this, no haircuts for the son. He's going to be a Nazirite from the womb until the day he dies. A little background here. A Nazirite oath was an oath that a man could take to grow closer to God. And there was no grapes, no alcohol, no forbidden food like pork or clams or anything like that. No haircuts, no contact with anything unclean from a Jewish standpoint. And this was a temporary period of time that they would take part in this Nazirite oath. But things were different for Samson. And he was going to be a Nazirite from birth until the day he died. Now, when the angel of the Lord first appears to Manoah's wife comes back to Manoah, and they go together to talk to the angel. And there's this back and forth strategic conversation that takes place. There's questions and very careful answers. And Manoah and his wife finally realize, after a long discussion, that this is an angel, this messenger is an angel seemingly from God. And the chapter ends very much in an optimistic way. Let's read the last 2 verses of chapter 13. It says, when her son was born, she named him Samson, and the Lord blessed him as he grew up. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir while he was in Mahaneh-dan, which is located between the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol. Now, as I said, things start really well for Samson. We see that the Lord is blessing him, and that it says the Spirit of the Lord was working through him. And after all the ugly and rotten history that we've gone through over these past chapters, it seems like something good is going to be happening in Israel. But it's important to remember that this was God's work. And remember that Israel seems to be at a very low point in their relationship with God. God's been 100% faithful, but Israel and their rebellion as a nation, as God's chosen people, is literally killing them. And once again, we remember that Samson is not divine. Samson is very much a human being, and he's subject to all the temptations that human beings are. But God wants them, God wants Samson, God wants us to respond with a life of trust. And that's exactly where we find ourselves as we begin this story of Samson. God sent his one and only son into the world, similarly to two unknown parents. And his son came, though, to demonstrate how much he loves us, how much he wants us to live in a trust relationship. We're to trust his goodness and trust his grace and trust his plan, and not depend upon our own natural tendencies to want to control our lives. So today, let's remember how good God is, and let's follow the one who loves us the most. Have an amazing day.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.